sometimes I see, especially younger coaches who are starting, it's hard when you start. You want to take lots of different things, you want to do lots of different things, and it's important to be versatile. And as you grow more and more, once you've coached hundreds of people, you start seeing patterns, etc. But what I would say is if you have a specific area, work in that area and, be great at it.
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets, the podcast where we talk with successful career coaches on how they built their success and the hard lessons they learned along the way. My name is Davis Nguyen, and I'm the founder of Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, and even $100,000 weeks. Before Purple Circle, I've grown several 7- and 8-figure career coaching businesses myself, and have been a consultant at 2 career coaching businesses that are doing over $100 million each. Whether you're an established coach or building your practice for the first time, you'll discover the secrets to elevating your coaching business.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Career Coaching Secrets podcast. I'm your host Rexhen, and today's guest is Laurence Borde, a globally recognized entrepreneur, leadership coach, and board advisor who has dedicated her career to helping senior leaders and organizations unlock their full potential. Laurence began in capital markets in New York and London before funding MediaTree, a global leader in investor communications. She later founded Perform Partnership, where she brings deep expertise in leadership coaching, board effectiveness, and cross-cultural team performance. A young global leader recognized by World Economic Forum, Laurence works at the intersection of strategy, communication, and personal transformation, partnering with C-suites and boards to elevate impact and lead with intention in today's complex world. And it's a pleasure for me to have her on the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Laurence.
Hi, Rexhen. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming, Laurence. It's a pleasure for us to have you on. I wanted to learn a little bit more about your beginnings and how this all got started. So what inspired you to become a coach and then start your own coaching business?
Great question. I started my career actually in capital markets, as you said, and then I became an entrepreneur. I founded a company. And I guess what led me to coaching was that I wanted to lead differently. I realized that when, I made some mistakes when I started, I had a way of how I learned leadership was from watching others, being in big Wall Street and city organizations. And then I sort of went into my own company and sort of, learned sort of leadership a little bit through intuition. And I really thought actually I could learn a lot by becoming a coach and using much more of a coaching style in my leadership approach. And I guess that's where the journey began. And I had a friend who was going through that same transformation, and people around me. All of a sudden, coaching became something that people talked about, and how it unlocked potential, and how it was a really effective way to lead. And so, yeah, that's how I started my journey.
Cool. And when it comes to Perform Partnership, it's been about 13 years since you've founded that one. And how many years has it been like actually doing the coaching? Maybe more than that?
Yeah. So basically, when I first started coaching was in the previous company that I founded, MediaTree.
Mm-hmm.
MediaTree takes C-suite, CEOs, CFOs, and senior execs on a journey to either IPO or a big merger. So it's a time in the organization when there's a really high stakes transaction. And so I effectively started advising slash coaching in that space. And initially it was really around helping people go through these transitions with somebody there. So it was a sort of, I was part of deal team. There were lawyers, bankers, there were a lot of advisors in these deal teams. And I realized that there was missing probably somebody to accompany that team or those individuals on the human side of that change. What was that going to feel like to go and raise billions of dollars around the world, to talk to investors? All of that sort of made me that there's an opportunity to help somebody through that great change that I wasn't officially accredited, and I didn't think it was coaching. And so I sort of started informally on lots and lots of transactions in my previous guys as CEO of MediaTree when I was running that business. And then I realized at some point, actually I could make a profession of it. I really realized that it would be something that I should really look at day to day. Of course, I had a wonderful person who I appointed CEO of the business. And so it felt like I could go on a second journey and it just felt natural to be a coach. But I had had a lot of hours and years, I almost want to say decade of coaching people before I actually became accredited and then created my company and then sort of coached full time.
And right now, where is your focus at? So is it still, when it comes to the type of clients that you coach right now, how would you describe that ideal client profile? Is it mostly leaders, CEOs, executives? Is there a certain industry or a certain demographic or maybe some commonalities in the goals that they're trying to reach? How would you describe the ideal client profile?
So the clients typically at first came very much from financial service firms. That was the beginning because that's sort of where I came from and that's the environment that I coached in. But then, of course, the companies that I've accompanied on their big transactions were from all walks of life. They tended to be larger corporations. I started very much in the corporate world. That's maybe a natural transition from where I was before. But today I would say what is sort of across the board to all the clients I coach is this sense of being on a fast track. It's usually high potentials. It's usually people who have very complicated, very sort of busy lives and are on a mission. So I would say typically I do coach in the senior leader strata, but there's a lot of founders that I coach and or, up and coming sort of more high potential individuals organizations have identified that really have the potential to go all the way. And I think it's wonderful to coach the younger generation because they're put in years and years of habits. And so there's a lot that you can work with them and open up and really help at a younger stage of their leadership development. And I love that. But typically the people I coach are senior leaders, fast trackers looking to stay on the fast track and people who have usually going through big transitions. I do a lot of onboarding, people who are doing IPOs or prepping for IPO or people who are doing big mergers and I have a little bit of a niche in that particular field.
Interesting. And how would you describe for all of these leaders, CEOs, co-founders, there are listening, as I mentioned in the beginning, there could be a portion of them that are listening. How would you describe the experience of working with you? How's the engagement? Is there a certain program of certain length? Is it customized to each leader? How would you describe it?
So it's interesting because the most leaders face similar issues or periods of their development where they will like to work with a coach. But I would say that every single engagement is different. So you might originally coach someone to on an onboarding, but of course it's going to be very, very different. What company they're from and what industry and the size of the business. Sometimes it's very large multinationals and sometimes tiny, tiny little. Obviously, it's an onboarding coaching program, but it's very, very different in how it shapes up. And generally, I mean, I think most coaches, again, you'll know you've interviewed so many coaches, you'll probably know some data on this, but for the same sort of thing that someone calls you for will tend to be very different depending on the person, the leader. So there are common themes. How it works, it tends to be based on an amount of time that I accompany them. So it's 6 to 8 sessions, 6 to 8 months. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. And it's at
Mhm.
periods of their career where they need that specific support. And it's not uncommon to have clients that I might have met when they were promoted to something. And then a few years on, they become CEO or CFO or something else. And then, or they got on a board and then they need a different set. And so it's been lovely for me because there's a lot of clients that I've met them when they were leaders, and still work with them for some of them as more senior leaders. So it's the programs are maybe sort of someone comes to me and says, "I want to coach to help me with conversation or with investor communication or whatever it is. There'll be an outline, there'll be specific things that we hit, but the reality is it's very much dependent on that person, what they already do, how they already are, and it's the actual content is very bespoke.
Interesting. And when it comes to these people that you work with, these leaders, how do they find you, or how do you find them in terms of marketing? What is working really well with you? What marketing channel would you say works best?
You'll be interested in this is probably really old school, but for me, for my business, I've been able to build it and to start scaling it very much on word of mouth. I haven't had a big, I don't have I haven't published a book yet. I don't have necessarily a podcast yet. Who knows? Necessarily advertise or use digital media all that much, if I'm honest, because of the type of people that I coach, and I developed a reputation, and also because I've been doing it for so many years, I've developed a reputation, and I'm lucky in that, so far the business has been able to develop very organically references or through being referenced in an organization and then having various senior leaders over different years that are assigned to me. So it's very organic.
Hmm.
Yeah. So far that's how it's been. But I always look at new ways, and I always think of how I could really even leverage that with today's new tools, new marketing tools and new development tools. But the reality is I feel like people find me and I find them. It sort of works organically.
It has been the case for many coaches, especially in the leadership, executive coaching space, that it is mostly from referrals, word of mouth. And yeah, we've noticed that. And the rest of it has been either LinkedIn being the main one when it comes to like social presence. So right now, thinking about your coaching business and looking to the future for the next 1 to 3 years, do you have any specific goals that you're working towards?
So I do, and one of the so there are sort of financial goals and there are development goals, because I think that growth is not just about the numbers, but in terms of financial, I try to improve my EBITDA year on year by 10 to 15%. The
Hmm.
company's been in business for, yeah, as you said, just over a decade. That seems to be building very organically. That financial goal is still there. And I think as long as we have growth, pre-tax profit growth, that's really what matters in terms of sustaining the business, sustaining the organization, the people, etc. Then in terms of sort of developmental growth, and that's one of the things I really love about coaching is you're constantly thinking about how you can be better. You can learn new sort of tools and also ways of coaching, and find interesting people around the world that have models and frameworks and stuff that they share with other coaches, etc. So they're the sort of professional development is really important to growth, because we're that much better when we deliver with our one-on-one clients. We also we use lots of, I'm not a sort of one tool coach. I have very much grown up. So I sort of went with neuro leadership when I accredited. And then, of course, I learned lots and lots of other sort of tools and stuff. And so my practice is very holistic. I bring a lot in. It's not about the, sort of classical coaching tools. There's a lot of other things that I experience first with myself. I'm also a coach supervisor. So I have a wonderful peer group of supervisors, and we founded this thing called Learning on the Edge. And we put ourselves through these crazy, edgy learning type weekends or sessions, day workshops to constantly grow and to become better coach effectively. And the growth ambition is around, of course, the money side, but also the quality of the coaching and the innovation that we can bring through that. And I think one thing that I probably am starting to look at more is, as I mentioned before, is really think about how do I use AI? How do I leverage without losing the human side of coaching, which is, of course, everything. That that you
Hmm.
make with clients is everything. And so, but there is room with AI possibly to grow as well, to use that tool to help people maybe collect data, et cetera, for between sessions. And so I'm also thinking about that. Those are the, I guess, challenges for me.
Interesting. Bringing AI plus, or not just AI, but whatever it is that are like creative ways of growing the business in a smarter way, plus also
Yeah.
thinking about the financial goals at the same time. Right now, do you have a specific team structure around your business?
So right now, the business is based on an associate model. So I effectively run it, and I have a number of people that I work with in different countries who are, people I know, who I work with, who I bring in as and when the assignment requires it. Some assignments are very specific and require sometimes a language skill or certain type of background. I just did a big coaching piece for a CEO who was onboarding the role, and then his leadership team, and they were in a M&A process. So there was like a triple sort of coaching whammy in Greece. And so there I chose somebody who had a very specific investor relations expertise to help coin an equity story. So this is very particular and very specific. And then in some cases I'll bring somebody. So it's very much sort of depending on the scope of the project. I worked with another associate on a board effectiveness for a very big consultancy firm in the UK that needed, or actually four of their boards assessed. So he and I work together on that project. So depending on the scope and the size, I'll bring people in. Obviously, one-on-one coaching a lot of times is because it's word of mouth. That person usually wants to work with me, and that's fine. So I'll make time for those clients as well. But the way the team is structured is very much on an associate model, which I think you'll find lots of coaching companies.
Yeah, so in this case, you're doing mostly the sales and marketing, or let's say organic marketing, because they're coming to you through referrals. And then whenever you need to, you would connect them with the right person from your associates.
That's exactly it.
And interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And so right now, you mentioned also, besides working one-on-one with the leader, you also can work with their team whenever is needed, right?
Yep. So the coaching, so you asked me earlier, programs. There's no typical program, but what we cover is individual coaching, so leadership and just one-on-one. We cover team coaching, but team can also mean like a wider team. So for example, some teams have different people in different countries. So I'm thinking, for example, like a sales team in a big organization might come together workshop day or 2 days. So that's the sort of thing, or a specific day on communicating with impact. They might have a theme that they want to explore in a strategy day, or so very much the sort of team, smaller leadership team, but also it can be a bigger team coming together in one place to work together. Facilitation of seminars, workshops, etc. And then it's also sort of, it can be very specific deal related type assignments. They're a little bit particular. There's not many coaches in that space, and it's a tiny market of advisors that will know that I coach in that space. And then, so it's like banks, for example, like a Rothschild or a Lazard or a Goldman Sachs would say to their client, "Look, after you're about to do this big merger, you'll need somebody that helps you with your presentation and with the messaging to investors, and that can coach you through that whole sort of the few months before you have to sort of jump that hurdle." So there's that very specific piece of coaching, which I guess is where I came from, right? Because I used to advise on capital markets and equity stories when I was a banker. So in a way, that's come with me, as well as the leadership and coaching. And then there's another part of the business, which is supervision. I love supervising coaches. I went to the CSA, which you might have heard of, a global academy for supervisors. I think it's fantastic. I think it's the best, but that's my own bias. So there's a piece of work that I do to help other coaches and supervise other coaches as well.
Interesting. And thanks, first of all, thanks for sharing that. So how does that work? Because that has come on the podcast also before, supervising coaches, but how would you explain that for any coach that's listening?
Well, so Any coach that's listening will know that sometimes you are in a situation and it's really a tough situation because you might have a dilemma. You might have your client might tell you something and coaching is a conversation, right? So there's always a question that you ask and you could be at the juncture of something and you could be asking that question, but wondering after the coaching session, well, should I have actually gone in this direction or that direction? So you might have faced something, or you have a systemic piece, you have sort of systemic pressures and something happening with this client that can't be translated into the system. There's so much complexity in coaching. We hold so much space for people to, develop and thrive and sometimes also we just have to hold the space because there is so much difficulty, pressure in those people's lives, right? So you're holding that space and that takes a toll. So coaches are usually really encouraged to have a space for themselves to be able to talk to another coach, which is called a supervisor. Very similar to medical supervision. It's a
Hmm.
place where a coach can come in full confidentiality to talk about different cases they see. And typically what happens in supervision is someone will bring you a case to or a situation where they have real fundamental questions. And it impacts also their coaching practice. They might have decided to use a tool, but they're wondering, is there other things? So it can be very practical supervision, as in, should I be more existential? I heard this. I couldn't
Hmm.
really sleep after that. I had difficulty understanding or relating to the organization when I knew that that's what this person was experiencing. So there's layers and layers that coaches will know comes with the work. You hold a lot. So the supervision is a space for you to be able to discuss it with a professional
Hmm.
who can just help you make sense of it and navigate through it and let go of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I do see how that is so useful for coaches because I feel like everybody kind of needs supervision at certain points, even if it's not coaches, also other professions, like you said, doctors do
Yeah.
have that as well. So it is very interesting that is a space that is also for coaches that is available. So I also wanted to touch on something that I feel like a lot of coaches who are listening would also be interested in knowing when it comes to investments. Has there been any specific investment that you've done throughout your course of running your business that you feel like, oh, that was a very good investment? I actually got a good return from it. Or could be investments in yourself, could be investments in the coaching business. Maybe you didn't get return, but you learned a lot. And if any, there could be also investments, if any, that you feel like, oh, that was a total waste of time and waste of money. If there's any of that, feel free to share that as well.
Okay. Okay. That's a really, really big question. So I guess the first thing I would say is who you are is how you coach. So I think for coaches, the investment in yourself, and I don't mean like going to a spa, I mean really investing in learning, in thinking about sort of topics that can be quite unsettling, but that everyone faces, really investing in books and reading and listening to other experts on certain topics, etc. So the investment, I would say the biggest investment for me is around developing the coaches, developing your curiosity, your skillfulness, your ability to ask questions, getting better listening, like anything that you can be in tune. And I don't just mean listening with your ears, right? I also mean listening with like your different brains. And one of my mentors is Snyder. It's a wonderful method called the three brains coaching. And it's the head, heart, and gut brain and how they need to be aligned. And so, any work that I do with Chris is amazing. He's based in Madrid. We do retreats and stuff, and so, those are amazing. Of course, the investment I made in becoming accredited in at CSA as a supervisor helped. We had to do a thesis, a lot of academic, loads and loads of reading. I think the syllabus was 45 books in the year. Luckily, I did it. I think it was just before COVID, but still, it was amazing. But there was a lot on top of your day job, right? So there's a lot of investment. It's also a course that costs some money, so you have to, you know, pay, but also go there. You have to take days out of the work, etc. So that was amazing. when I first accredited, I accredited with the Neuro Leadership Institute. I felt that that was a really good investment. I mean, generally, when things like tools, right, learning how to do a Hogan and becoming a accredited Hogan assessor or an MBTI, a game changer index. I mean, there's so many leadership circle profile, like those ones are important as well. Understanding psychometrics, understanding, but there's also amazing, investments. I was telling you earlier about my group of peer supervisors, and we did all sorts of amazing things. We went with a woman called Jude Jennison, who's a coach, and she coaches with horses. So we went and learned about leadership and with through horses. So, all the things that you bring that mean that you have to take time out of you're basically not seeing clients that day and you're paying some money to go there and sometimes it's residential, et cetera. All of that I think is huge and really an amazing investment. I think in terms of then there's like little things you can invest in the business. And I'm sure other coaches have told you this, getting a virtual assistant or getting AI to help with scheduling or getting sometimes having a partner that you share profits with. That can be also quite wonderful for some people or a few partners. I mean, you can build the model depending on what you want. But for me, it's very much the investment is around the learning and the development and really so that when we make programs, they're infused with these other perspectives and constantly being really at the forefront of what's out there in coaching. I also invest time and money in my professional association. So I'm affiliated with ICF. I was on the board of the
Mm-hmm.
UK ICF. And for me, that's important because it's a global sort of coaching and you have like the chapter meetings in the UK, but you can go to the US and you have similar types of coaching approaches, et cetera, and new things that people share in the context of that. So I think the investment for coaches really is around constantly being informed and finding out new ways of coaching and trying things out, creative coaching. There's so much that you can do. You asked me about if there's things that I regret and investments that I've made, and I'm not going to name anything in particular, but I would say sometimes you go on these courses that are very expensive, coaching courses for specific things, and they're not necessarily all that they are advertised to be. And this is a little bit why I co-founded this Learning on the Edge community because I went and found 12 or 11 like-minded, very senior coaches. We've all done all these courses and we've been to these universities and da da da. But what if we created and curated a syllabus and found the
Mm-hmm.
experts around the world that would teach us about these topics that would take us to the edge of our comfort? And I think every time you go to an edge, you build resilience. So that's helping us then when we encounter things with our clients, we have maybe more capacity for the client.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing all of this. And from our research last year, the best investment turned out to be investment in a coach that can help you out. So generally, you mentioned also a mentor,
Wow.
slightly different, but also could be a coach, could be a business coach, could be a mindset coach for you, or it could be a supervisor, just like you mentioned, because you also need supervision. That has turned out to be one of the best investments. One of the worst investments, not that is a bad investment on itself, it's just that when it comes to the return on that investment, it didn't perform as well, was specific certifications.
Mm,
Because for coaches that were working with individuals as opposed to working with the companies, the individuals themselves didn't really know much about the certifications that these coaches had, or really didn't care that much about
yeah.
certification because they were not aware of these certifications. But there were only certain companies that would actually require you to be certified or have some sort of certification for you to work with them. That was the case where it made sense, but for individuals it didn't make sense. So that turned out to be one of the investments that had the lowest return. But yeah, like I said, there's no such thing probably as bad investments. Could be only things that are, just like I said, marketed as something else, and you potentially might even not be their ideal client profile, but you just kind of like somehow got into their course and it just was not the right fit. And that would be like an investment of time and money that was just like not great, but you get to learn how to avoid these in the future as well.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised those are your findings because that's exactly right. And I have to say, mentorship and supervision is amazing. Like however experienced you are, and as a coach, and I will say how amazing supervision is. My supervisor is incredible. I've had the chance to have him. It's 2016, so almost 10 years. And what a difference. He sharpens the knife. I go into his kitchen and oh my goodness, are the knives sharpened after because he's looking at my practice, the uncomfortable questions. He's really helping me grow as a coach. So I think that's a fantastic investment. And yeah, I think you're right to say it's not that they're bad investments when you go on certain courses. It's just that sometimes, and it's interesting because you always think when I'm accredited and I reaccredit every 3 years and I'm very careful about that. But honestly, I think I've been asked twice in my whole career for whether I've got this accreditation. So
Hmm.
I think you're right. I don't think that's necessarily what people zero in on. They want a coach that helps them unlock potential, help them through a certain period of time, which is hugely complex, where that presence and that sort of bond that you create with your coach is going to really help them grow and accelerate that growth. So they almost don't care how it's done. They just want you there with your whole self and your whole attention and your whole challenge and your ability to show them, flip their perspective and ask them questions and be there for them. So I think you're right. That's ultimately what people will look for in a coach. And that's where coaches, I think, should invest is how am I the most present, best version of myself coaching that I can be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, right now, what is the biggest challenge for you thinking business wise that you're trying to solve for next in your coaching business? Where do you see the bottleneck right now?
So for me, I guess there are challenges. One is really around how do I create bigger systemic change? Okay, because I'm called a lot to coach in the C-suite or senior leadership. At the end of the day, that's an individual. That's an individual. Maybe you have a leadership team, but then ultimately, more and more is how can I have more of a systemic impact? And I was really pleased because a couple of months ago, I was contacted by a law firm, and the founding partner wanted all his partners coached. And that's amazing because you think, wow, on a specific issue, right? I don't want to give too much of the content, but if all their partners on that issue and they all start adopting a similar way and it's just going to create a hugely virtuous circle and it's going to open up growth for this firm. And
Hmm.
that's a sort of for me that's the challenge, right? I'm looking for situations. I mean, I'm not actively looking, but I guess that's my first question is how do I make it broader, more systemic and durable? I'm sure every coach listening today will know you coach somebody and they make huge amounts of change, but the system is not changing around them and they're only limited in how impactful that can be. So that's one challenge. And then I guess the second one I've already mentioned is, how do we use AI? Like I'm a real
Hmm.
believer of coaching is human, coaching is, and I know that that's probably some coaches are listening who have created whole wonderful businesses with a platform that AI a lot, and they've probably cracked that challenge of how to keep the humanity and the relational presence and the importance of that space that you create with a coachee. But that's my second challenge is how do I leverage the growth? How do I use what tool do I use? How do I use it without losing any of the
Hmm.
relational presence for me is everything. The power of acknowledging, listening, hearing, and being there for the person is it's really generative. And so the second challenge is, well, how do I use an AI tool to leverage that?
Yeah, cool. And so, right now, and because we're getting to the final minutes, I wanted to ask you also shortly, what advice would you give to other coaches who are looking to scale their impact?
So I don't love giving advice. I'm a coach. Question, what do you think? But I guess the advice that I've given myself maybe is really to build your portfolio of work. Really think about that you want to be, the type of people you want to coach, where you thrive, the situations where you really make a difference. I have certain situations where I'm very, very niche. It just comes naturally to me. That's the person I am. And people will repeatedly ask me to coach in that space. And there's a reason. It's because it sort of makes sense. I'm in a sort of flow mode when I coach. And I would say to people, as I've said to myself, think about what coach do you want to be? What are the clients that you want to coach? What is the impact? And then I would say zero in and be great at it and enjoy it. I really think that's sometimes I see, especially younger coaches who are starting, it's hard when you start. You want to take lots of different things, you want to do lots of different things, and it's important to be versatile. And as you grow more and more, once you've coached hundreds of people, you start seeing patterns, etc. But what I would say is, if you have a specific area, work in that area, and be great at it.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks so much, Laurence. Thank you for coming to our show. For anyone who wants to connect with you or find you, they can go into LinkedIn and look up Laurence Borde. They'll be able to find you on LinkedIn. And there's also the website.
Performpartnership in one word.com. So it's performpartnership.com.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laurence. We'll also put that into our description so that people can find it. But yeah, thank you so much for today.
Thanks, Reg. It was a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Career Coaching Secrets. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this episode to catch future episodes. This podcast was brought to you by Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, or even $100,000 weeks, all without burning out and making sure that you're making the impact and having the life that you want. To learn more about our community and how we can help you, visit joinpurplecircle.com.